Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabi ajma'in. Allahumma allimna ma yanfa'una wanfa'na bima 'allamtana wa zidna ilma. Allahumma inna nas'aluka ilman yanfa'una irfa'una. Allahumma inna nas'aluka ilman nafi'a wa rizqan wasi'a wa 'amalan mutaqabbala wa shifaa'an min kulli da'. Ya wa at-ta'allum wa at-ta'lim wa at-tadhakkur wa at-tadhkir wal ifada wal istifada. والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, we thank and praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for affording us the opportunity to come together to acquire such knowledge which will guide us to and guide us along the straight path. I speak under correction. If my memory serves me, we had reached until هل الربوي محدود في الأصناف الستة المذكورة أم لا? So last week we had looked at the prophetic narration of the Prophet ﷺ that listed usurious items. The Prophet ﷺ talks about 6 items, and those 6 items are divided into 2 groups, 2 categories. The one group would be al-dhahab bil-dhahab wal-fidda bil-fidda, gold for gold, silver for silver. The other group, in terms of the listing, the balance of the 4 items, which would be wheat for wheat, barley for barley, dates for dates, and salt for salt. That's in the second category. The important question which our scholars ask would be that usurious items, in other words, when you're trading with these items, like gold for gold and silver for silver, is it limited to these 6 items, or do we extend it to apply to other items as well? So as we read from the heading says هل الربوي محدود في الأصناف الستة المذكورة أم لا? Usurious items, is it limited to the 6 items mentioned, or do we extend it to other items? We're going to answer that question now بإذن الله سبحانه وتعالى. وبعد أن اطلعت على شروط المعقود عليه الربوي وعرفت أنه 6 أصناف بنص الشارع بقي أن نتساءل. So after you have come across the conditions of the contracted item when it happens to be usurious, وعرفت أنه 6 أصناف, and you've come to know that they are 6 types, if you wanted to, or rather 6 items, بنص الشارع, and that is by the text of the legislator. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that specifically on the tongue of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. بقي أن نتساءل. It remains for us to ask the following question. What question is that? هل ربا البيع وشروطه منحصرة في هذه الستة لا تتعدى إلى غيرها أم لا? Is it limited to those items, or does it go beyond that? And أقول وبالله التوفيق, the simple answer to that particular question would be الأموال الربوية لا تنحصر في الفئات الستة. That usurious items are not limited to the 6 mentioned in the text. بل تتعدى إلى غيرها من الأموال, but rather it extends to other types of wealth. It goes beyond that and extends to other types of wealth. مما يشترك مع في العلة, which they share the same underlying reasoning with. And perhaps here, for our benefit and for the benefit of some of the students, what we find is that we subscribe to Islam. It's a divine way of life based on the Quran. The Quran, in terms of its coverage of cases that it covers, is limited. So how do we take that law and apply it to a potential unlimited amount of cases? Probably the most common example used would be that of wine. Categorically, in terms of Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about wine and He labels it as rijsun fajtanibuhu. It is, according to our school of thought, impure. It is impermissible to consume. Fajtanibuhu, steer clear thereof. So the ruling of wine is that it's impermissible. When our scholars look at wine, the Prophet ﷺ informs us that it intoxicates. That's the reason why it is outlawed. We take that particular underlying reasoning and now we start extending it to other than wine. So a person looks now at vodka by way of example, and he finds that vodka is also a liquid. It also intoxicates. and they apply the ruling of wine to vodka. So it's an extension of the ruling. So we come back to our point in study. What are we looking at? We are looking at the 6 units, if you wanted to, which the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that these are usurious items. When we look at them, we find that they have an underlying reasoning. This is the reason why the Prophet ﷺ said that gold for gold, silver for silver in the one category, and then the balance in the other category. There's a reason. Once we understand the reasoning, we can now extend the law by way of what our scholars refer to as qiyas. So how do they define qiyas? I'm trying to think of my own wording now, but ilhaqul far'i bil asli li'illatin tajma'u baynahuma. So you have a major premise and you have a minor premise. The major premise here would be wine. It is impermissible. So you take the ruling of the major premise and you apply it to the minor premise, vodka. How do you apply it to the minor premise? Because they share the same underlying reasoning. So likewise, we're now going to look at these items, these usurious items, and we're going to look at the ratio legis, at the underlying reasoning, and apply that bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, Bismillah.
It's the ratio legis.
Ratio. Is it?
Ja.
Allah relevantly.
Ik heb een strong advice against it. You pronounce it.
Is it? Oh, jazakallah khair. Allah reward you, habibi.
You see the ratio legis.
Ratio legis.
Yeah, legis, that's it.
No, excellent. Allah reward you, banana. Ratio legis.
It sounds like it's wrong.
It sounds wrong,
It
yeah.
sounds colloquial.
Yeah. But that's probably what makes it right. Ratio legis. I'm going to have a lot of fun just saying ratio legis to myself and thinking about you. Ratio legis. In other words, the underlying reasoning. The underlying reasoning. Now, the ratio legis. Now, الأموال الربوية لا تنحصر في الفئات الستة بل تتعدى إلى غيرها. من الأموال مما يشترك معها في العلة، فعلة أموال الزمرة الأولى هي الثمنية، أو في التسمية الحديثية المعاصرة العلة هي العملية، فكل نقد رائج لا بد من اعتباره ربويا. So when we look at gold and silver, and so gold for gold, silver for silver, the Prophet ﷺ says these are usurious items. So when you're trading in these items over and above the conditions mentioned previously, there are certain other conditions. Now we look at gold and silver, but that's not our point here really. Our point here is that gold and silver, for practical purposes, and the booklet is intended to just inform our micro transactions. So for practical purposes, what are we going to say? That gold and silver, the underlying reasoning, classically stated would be naqd. In other words, it is money commodity. Now the word money commodity is very interesting because it's made up of 2 words, money commodity. In other words, gold would serve as money and it serves as a commodity in and of itself. So I would think that from an English perspective, that translating gold and silver as money commodity would be a valid translation because it's money and it's a commodity. What we have in today's time would be money, but it's not necessarily money commodity because the paper, it's legal tender and it has a value in that particular regard, but it doesn't have an intrinsic value to it. So it doesn't have a commodity value. So there are a number of differences between gold and silver and fiat money, in other words, the money that we have. But for riba purposes and for zakah purposes, we treat them as the same. So in other words, the rules that apply to gold and silver in as far as legal tender is concerned, the same rules apply to fiat money. And Allah SWT knows best. One of our teachers and colleagues have a work on it, Mln Yaqub, particularly addressing fiat money, paper money, and how a juristic acquisition of it. In other words, gold and silver moving off from there and then going to what our classical scholars would refer to as, you had money commodity and then like gold and silver, and then you would have like copper coins. And the copper coins weren't treated the same like the gold and silver. How did we move from there? How do we transition from there and come to accept our paper money as we have it over here? It's something very well worth visiting bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now we're given an example now in relation to, we looked at the hadith says gold and silver, they are usurious items. What did we do? We looked at gold and silver and said it's money commodity. Our current money commodity would be fiat money. So the same rules, extra rules that apply to gold and silver in trading applies to our paper money. How does it spell out in terms of an example? The example reads as follows. فَعِنْدَمَا تُسَافِرُ, we've given this example before, but it appears in the text here, inshallah, so we'll run through it again. فَعِنْدَمَا تُسَافِرُ لِلْعُمْرَةِ وَالْحَجِّ عَلَى سَبِيلِ الْمِثَالِ, when you travel for umrah or hajj by way of example, what happens is تذهب إلى مصرف العملات تبيع الرندات بريالات. You go to a foreign exchange, and what are you going to be doing? You're going to be selling rands for riyals, money exchange. I think sometimes, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but when, just in terms of a conversation, when we go into the foreign exchange, in our psyche, do we think of it as a sale? Like I'm selling something, I'm buying something. Generally, no. Even the language that we use, we say we're going to the foreign exchange, going to change money. I'm going to change money. Whereas, wallahu a'lam, it is actually a sale. Look, I think the terminology is not only unique to English, but in Arabic also when you exchange money, it's called sarf. But sarf is a form of a sale, it's an exchange. It's a commutative transaction, there's a commodity and there's a counter value. Like when I'm going to buy, I'm going to purchase riyals, and I'm selling you rands for those riyals. Tamam? And what's interesting to us would be the fact that it may be in fiat money, but it falls under the bracket of usurious items. So therefore we need to consider those added conditions which the Prophet ﷺ placed. I wanted to say imposed, but it's not imposed. The Prophet ﷺ placed, when it comes to money, commodity, trading in fiat money. So let's just take a step back. تذهب إلى مصرف, you go to the foreign exchange with your money. تبيع رندات, you're going to sell rands for riyals. فهذا بيع نقد لنقد. So this, if you look at it, it's a sale of money commodity for money commodity. In other words, وهو ربوي بربوي. So you're exchanging one usurious item for another usurious item. نعم. يخضع لقيود بيوع الربوي بجنسه أو بشريكه في الزمرة. So now, since it's a usurious commodity for another usurious commodity, what does it mean now? That this sale is subject to the added conditions. Now, added conditions of what? When you're exchanging one genus, am I getting that right, Habibi? No, the pronunciation. No, I'm not joking. I'm serious. I'm not joking about it, because I'm not. You don't have a. Okay, sure. We'll have to check Google later on. No. So one genus for another genus, or it is within the same group, like it's not rands for rands, but rands for riyals. So it's like gold for silver. Now, فيجوز لك أن تبيع الرندات للريالات. It is permissible for you to sell your rands for the riyals. شريطة, on condition that أن يتوفر فيه شرطان, on condition that, or as long as two conditions are met. What are those two conditions? التحلل والتقابض. The contract, in other words, the wording of the contract must be cash. In other words, must be immediate. Right? And on the back of the transaction which is immediate, reciprocal taking possession of the money and its counter value must take place. In other words, we have a sale, the terms of the sale is that it's cash. I'm giving you the rands and you're giving me the riyals. And over and above that, what must happen? Actual taking possession of the rands and the riyals respectively must take place. Now, so التحلل والتقابض, but ويجوز التفاضل. It is permissible for there to be a discrepancy in terms of the amounts. So I go with 1,000 rands, but I only get 333 riyals. No problem, as long as it's cash. Now, فتبيع 1000 رندا ب700 ريال. By way of example, you give 1,000 rands and then you get 700 riyals. I don't think you get that nowadays, no? You don't. Now, but also importantly, what happens sometimes, when a person is discussing, I find that sometimes students, they focus almost on the amounts, man. The amounts sound ridiculous. Now, how can that be? The amounts are really secondary from the Shari perspective. Sharia, we're just looking at what the Sharia requirements are. The Sharia requirements are only two. Or what are they? That it must be a cash sale and you must take possession thereof. Whether I give you 1,000 rands and you give me 2,000 riyals, that's a secondary issue. You with me? And many times, why I mention this example is because it doesn't mean something is permissible Sharia. That is, it makes 100% business sense. The business sense aspect of it, that you need to answer that question. And I think it's a very important, and it comes as somewhat of a disclaimer, but it's also the truth. So Sharia practitioners, by way of example, they say sometimes, stay in your lane. So if you want to give financial advice, I'm told, and it makes sense to me, that you need to be qualified. You must be a qualified financial advice advisor. You need to be a qualified financial advisor, right? If you're not a qualified financial advisor, and then you may get in trouble, and rightly so. So if somebody comes, for example, they want to know, look, it's permissible for me to finance the purchase of my house using this. I can say in terms of the Sharia it's permissible. That doesn't mean that it's the best option for you and the most viable option for you, or whether you, considering your personal financial status, should actually go into it. So it's an important point to keep in mind, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. وَلَوْ دَخَلْتَ سُوقًا مِنَ الْأَسْوَاقِ. This is the example we give a few times. If you enter into a marketplace, so we refer to it as malls basically. So let's say you go to Canal Walk. Why I'm referring to that is because if you come in one of the entrances, there's a forex right there. So you're coming into the mall, and now you go to one of the shop. وَبِئْتَ الرَّنْدَاتِ. You're selling, you're exchanging your rands for riyals. وَسَلَّمْتَهَا لِلْمُشْتَرِي. You hand it over to the person purchasing your rands now. ثُمَّ تَسَوَّقْتَ. And then you go on and you do your shopping, and then you come back. وَاسْتَسْلَمْتَ الرِّيَالَةِ بَعْدَ تَسَوُّقِكَ. And then you come back, and now you're taking the monies off when you're leaving. فَهَذَا لَا يَجُوزُ. This wouldn't be permissible. Why? لِعَدَمِ التَّقَابُضِ قَبْلَ الْمُفَارَقَةِ عَنْ مَجْلِسِ الْعَقْدِ. Why? Because you didn't take possession of the goods prior to the is it now right, dissolution, the breaking up of that contractual sitting. Before the contractual sitting dissolves, what must happen now is you gave your rands, you must take your riyals, and then you're on your way.
Is a practical example. I don't know if one has come across it, but they're very trusting in Makkah and Medina. So you may come to a shop and you're short.
No.
And sometimes it's in a jewelry shop, and
No.
other times it may be in a foreign exchange.
No.
And then they're telling, look, you actually need to bring a few more. Even to that extent, that wouldn't be permissible because there's not complete
No, absolutely. And it reminds me, so if I can just repeat that on the what's the name? Mawlana Irshad is mentioning a potential example, and that is when you find yourself in the blessed city of Makkah or Medina. So in the marketplace, people are generally very trusting. So you're purchasing something, and you don't have all of the money. So let's say you're purchasing jewelry, and let's say it's 1,000 riyals, and you only have 950. So the person tells you, you can make the purchase and you can pay the balance, at a later stage. That wouldn't be valid. If you wanted to, you could say it's valid to the extent of the 950 that you're paying, but the other part, but that would be. My mind is telling me, but I don't want to be presumptuous also, that safaqatan, if you safaqatin, you break it up like this, but it appears to be a problem because the one is going to encroach on the other one, and then the whole sale is going to be invalid. So one shouldn't do that. Ensure that it's cash. Now what happens is, many times when we're dealing with one another, we fall back on this whole idea, and I'm to intentionally call it a notion, because it's a notion in this particular regard. You say, we trust one another. Even your trust mustn't be misplaced. And a misplacement of trust is when you invest trust into something that the Sharia hasn't placed trust in there. So it's a misplacement. And who knows us better than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows us? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, put these parameters into place. In other words, when you are transacting, then you transact along these lines when the items in question are usurious. So that's very, very important. So sometimes our sense of what is right and what is wrong can be misplaced. And very importantly, in terms of our methodology, I'm not going to tell you it's because your logic doesn't work. What I'm saying is that's an understandable logic, but in this instance, the Sharia has a higher logic. And when something is like a logic, and then there's a higher logic, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's logic is always a higher logic. You with me? And I think it's very important when calling towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You understand in order to be understood. And sometimes when we're dealing with people, they come from a particular paradigm, and their paradigm is a Western paradigm. Their outlook and their construct of contracts is based on a Western paradigm. And therefore if you understand that, and then it makes you a bit more, it never ever leads to a compromise, because we will not compromise in terms of the Sharia, but it will make us understand in order for us to be understood in terms of where the Sharia comes from. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. What about forex trading? I've often seen ads online about this. Is it permissible? Hey, that is a question that we'll have to tackle separately altogether. The class doesn't deal with it per se, but perhaps maybe next week we can look further into it. Our class for today will also be a bit shorter, bi-idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We will look at about a half an hour or 35 minutes, bi-idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But thank you for that question. We will deal with it perhaps like in next week's class and talk specifically about trading online. Yeah. Look, the trading in forex is absolutely permissible. The Prophet ﷺ, the narration talks about it. But what happens in current forex, there's a lot of accidental things that impact on it. The current format, the online format, and certain of the conditions that apply to that. So in light of those added conditions, does it make the transaction impermissible? Does it make it permissible? We can look at that next week, bi-idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and deal with that. Barakallahu fikum. Ahamiyatu wa dawru ribal buyu'i. Okay, so I think that if we work through this page, bi-idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then we can leave the sale of jewelry for next week, bi-idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Barakallahu fikum. Ahamiyatu wa dawri ribal buyu'. The importance and the role of ribal buyu'. وقبل أن نتجاوز هذه المسألة إلى ما يليه أيها الطالب الكريم دعني ألفت نظرك إلى أمرين مهمين. Before we go beyond this particular issue, allow me, O honest student, to turn your attention to two important matters. The first matter reads as follows: الربا ينقسم إلى قسمين. From the very outset, when we look at riba, now up until this point in time, we've been discussing riba, but the word interest hasn't come up yet. We are dealing with sales. So riba as a concept is divided into two types. The first type is riba al-qard. Riba, so let's look at the word riba again. The word riba means to increase. When we use it in its technical meaning, it refers to an unjustified increase. This unjustified increase can happen on one of two platforms. The one platform, which is the primary platform, would be the loan platform, the loan contract. So I lend you 1,000 rands. When you repay me next week or payday, then I want you to return the principal amount 1,000 plus you must give me 100 rands. That 100 rands is an increase. It's an unjustified increase that is called interest. So riba, in as far as a loan is concerned, we can translate the word riba al-qard as interest very comfortably. And in as far as Quran is concerned, I think we mentioned this, in as far as Quran is concerned, when Allah talks about riba in Quran, in all of those verses, it doesn't refer to the riba of a sale. It refers to riba al-qard. It refers to that type of unjustified increase which finds its placement in a loan. That's riba al-qard. What we've been discussing is the second type, and that is riba al-buyu'. That unjustified increase, and it doesn't have to be monetary. It can also potentially find its place where? In a sale. We're having a sale, and now you have a... So this is one example where you can look at the word riba, and then you translate it. If you translate riba as interest, and that's it. Like riba means interest, it's almost like, or it's exactly the same like translating the word deen as religion. Because the word deen incorporates religion and much more. I mean, when I talk about religion in the modern sense, referring to ritual acts of worship. So the word deen covers the ritual acts of worship, but much more than that. In other words, it's a way of life. Likewise, the word riba, it covers interest, yes, in as far as riba al-qard is concerned. But the word riba is more broad and encompassing than that. So that's the first important thing for us to keep in mind, that riba is basically divided into two broad categories. Riba al-qard, the riba that comes off a loan, which is interest, and riba which finds its home within sales. And that's a sale we're doing. Foreign exchange is a sale. And if those conditions are not met, then the transaction is considered to be usurious. وبيان ربا القرض سوف يأتي إن شاء الله تعالى في فصل القرض. When we talk about loans, there's going to be a specific chapter which deals with loans that we're going to be talking about. And then we'll speak further about interest and so forth بإذن الله سبحانه وتعالى. وقد رأيت هنا مسألة من مسائل ربا البيوع وهي بيع العملة لعملة أخرى. And you have seen one issue that we have raised in terms of riba al-buyu, riba in relation to sales. And what is that? When you sell one currency for another currency. وَلَاحَظْتَ أَنَّ لِوُقُوئِهَا وُجُودًا لَا مَحَالَةً. And you see that it has a practical expression, undoubtedly. ولوقوعها أهميتها البالغة وخطورتها نظرا إلى القيود التي قيدها رسول صلى الله عليه وسلم. So the fact that you have this type of sale, and we find that it's very important that you and I be cognizant about these added conditions. Lest we do something that we know, we consider to be very fine. I go, we trust one another, so I give you my rands, I'll come back later and collect my riyals, not realizing that we're actually falling under the ambit of the prohibition of the Prophet ﷺ. So that's important, the first issue over here. The second issue, and this is a rather important issue, it speaks as follows. ثانيها أيها الطالب الكريم. The second issue, O noble student. هذه المسألة. This particular issue, we're cutting away a lot of the extras and just zoning in onto a very important aspect. And what is that aspect? That is بيع الذهب الفضة بقيودها من التحلل والتقابض. That's selling gold for silver. So in terms of the prophetic narration, gold and silver, they belong to different genus. I'm thinking there may be a plural there that Yahya is going to throw at us now. So I'm just like covering. I'm just like covering. They say all you get, just like covering him, and because I don't know what the plural there is, but they belong to different generic groups, gold and silver, right? So now, if you're going to be selling gold for silver, then there are conditions. What are the conditions? It must be cash, and you must take possession. I give you the gold, and you give me the silver, right? Now that issue, we just need to understand that issue. At least the conceptualization of it. The Prophet ﷺ spoke about 6 things. The first 2 things he spoke about was gold and silver. Gold for gold, there are certain conditions. But now gold for silver, there are 2 conditions. The contract must be a cash contract, and you must take possession immediately. Now that issue is very important for us to understand. Why? Because تحمل في كيانها سر منع ربا البيوع. Because that particular example carries within itself the reason why we are not allowed to have riba in sales. And what is that? وَسَدُّ الْبَابِ إِلَى رِبَا الْقَرْضِ. And because it closes the back door, so to say, to riba al-qard. So if we go back now to the beginning, we said riba is divided into 2. The one is riba relating to sales, and the other one is riba relating to loans. The primary form of riba is interest, the one that relates to loans. Now, Islam prohibits it. And like Islam has prohibited it, all of the other heavenly religions has also prohibited. And the verse will be mentioned a bit later. وَأَخْذِهِمُ الرِّبَا وَقَدْ نُوعًا وَأَكْلِمُ وَلَنْ سِبَاطٍ. The people of the book, both the Jews and the Christians, they were prohibited from interest. What is interest? Interest is a positive stipulated return over and above the principal amount which you've given to a person. Islam and all of the religions prior to it prohibited that. So just think about a house now. So the front door of the house is interest on a loan. So what did all the heavenly religions do? Close that door. You can't do that. But now Islam comes along. Islam also closes that door, puts a bolt on that door. But over and above that, Islam realizes that what can happen is that you can come through the back door and do the same thing. So what Islam does is it comes to the front door, puts a bolt on there, goes around to the back door and closes the back door as well. What is the back door? The back door is riba al-buyu, whereby you can reconstruct an interest-based loan. You reconstruct it on a sale format. And at the end of the day, you're doing exactly the same thing. So for this reason, Islam closed the back door. So how does that work? So for example, clearly everybody would tell you, Yahya, whether you need or not, Mawli Yahya, whether you need or not, you want to borrow money from me. So I lend you 1,000 rands. I say, but you must pay me interest. So you must pay me 1,150 rand. Okay? So permissible, impermissible? It says impermissible. It's a loan and you're getting a positive stipulated return. That is impermissible. Okay. So now I say, okay, what I'm going to do, let's do this. I'm not going to lend you money. I'm going to sell you money. What money am I going to sell you? Gold for gold? No. I mean money for money? No. I'm going to give you rands. And then what do? You're going to give me riyals. But now, if we do that, what does the Prophet ﷺ say? You can do that, no problem. And there can be discrepancy in terms of the amount. I'll give you 1,000 rands, and then you give me the value in riyals of 1,150 rands. Is there a problem with that? No problem. But what does the Prophet ﷺ say? It must be cash. Because if it wasn't cash, and then we're opening up the back door. Because as opposed to me lending you 1,000 rands and you giving 1,150 rands, what do? I sell you 1,000 rands. And then you repay me the equivalent of that value in riyals. And when do you give me the money? At a later stage. And this is really the wisdom. And as for at the very beginning, what did we say? Let us hold our horses. In terms of why would a person do this or a person do that, gold for gold? It is this particular construct. And then, we see, now we can understand it a bit better. Not it a bit better, the verse when Allah SWT says, Al-yawma akmaltu lakum. I've completed and perfected. This is how Allah SWT in terms of legislation perfected our way of life. That it's, لِلَّذِينَ أَحْسَنُ الْحُسْنَى وَزِيَادَةً. You have the goodness in terms of the universal truths that were contained within all of religions, وَزِيَادَةً. And Allah grants you more. What does Allah SWT talk about in terms of Quran? What does Allah SWT say? شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس. That's enough, isn't it? Finish. We can continue now. Allahu Akbar. But you can't go because it's in the middle of the verse. Mawli Yahya. So what do you say now? وَبَيِّنَاتٍ مِنَ الْهُدَى وَالْفُرْقَانِ. That بَيِّنَاتٍ مِنَ الْهُدَى, the nuances, the finer touches that makes our sublime way the most sublime way. Islam. And بَيِّنَاتٍ مِنَ الْهُدَى وَالْفُرْقَانِ. والحمد لله لنعمة الإسلام وكفى بها النعمة وبهذا القدر الكفاية ولله الحمد من قبل ومن بعد. نسأل الله يوفقنا وإياكم ويتقبل منا ومنكم جميعا وأن يجعل هذا المجلس الذي اتخذناه سبيلا لمعرفة الله سبحانه وتعالى ولمعرفة دينه. نسأل الله سبحانه أن يجعل سببا للقرب إليه. نعم. اللهم بما أكرمتنا من الجلوس في هذا المجلس المبارك نسألك يا الله أن تتمم فضلك علينا ظاهرا وباطنا وإلى حضرة النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم. سبحان ربنا رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين الحمد لله رب العالمين.